So here I've got a shoe which is just an update of the Timp 5 to include a really interesting feature, which is the BOA system. So this is the Timp 5 BOA, and this BOA system here basically allows you to loosen and tighten the fit pretty much on trail, which is quite unique. But there are downsides to this as well, and I'm going to get to those in the fit, the feel, and the durability of this shoe. And then I'm going to give my conclusion to say where this works and where you should actually go for the original Timp 5. So getting straight into the fit. This is a Altra shoe, so obviously we're going to have a slightly wider toe box here. It's worth noting that this isn't quite as wide as the Lone Peak or the Superior. We do have a little bit of taper around the big toe and definitely more of a taper around these little toes as well. So it feels a bit more snug, a bit more performance oriented, and if that works for you depends on your toe splay. Looking into the midfoot around here, again it's a little narrower. Many Altras are actually kind of narrow in the midfoot. If you do need something wider, then it's worth looking at maybe the Lone Peak in a wide option. But here we have a performance like fit which definitely keeps your foot locked down. But there's a difference here, and this is the upper. The upper is quite flexible in general, and I found that it didn't give that secure feeling like I found in the Timp 5. And I'm going to come to that in the feel because I think this is a real different shoe purely because of that reason. Looking into the heel, it's semi-structured. It's got a little bit of stiffness in there, but it's still somewhat flexible. It's definitely stiffer than like the Superior and the Lone Peak. So if the shape of the heel actually fits your foot, then you'll probably find a pretty good lockdown. But if you found a little irritation in the Timp or anything, you're not going to find much of a difference in this one. It's going to feel the same. So on to the main feature, this BOA system here. You can see that the dial basically allows it to lock down. You're getting a tighter fit there. And then you loosen it off by pulling the dial out and then pulling the straps away. This isn't the top of the range BOA, which has the fine-tuned lockdown, which you can actually turn forwards and backwards to loosen. But still, it allows for quick lacing adjustments on the trail. Where I started having a problem with the fit was mainly around the ankle cuff and the heel lockdown in general. Normally in Altra shoes, I use the second eyelet, which basically allows for a lace lock to be in there. Just give us 1 second. Here on the Lone Peak 9, you can see that I've actually got a loop which goes back into the top eyelet there, and it allows me to lock down the ankle cuff really well. If you need to do that yourself, have a look up at the lace lock or the runner's loop, and you'll find tutorials online for that. Back to the Timp 5 BOA. Obviously, because it's a BOA system, you don't have that ability at all. So you're really reliant upon the actual BOA lacing system to give a lockdown throughout the whole foot here. And that brings issues because if you find a little bit of tightness across the forefoot here, well, you can't loosen it. You're stuck with that same pressure evenly distributed throughout the BOA system. And whereas they've tried to perfect this with 3 straps coming across, which will distribute the pressure across the top of the midfoot, it doesn't allow for that fine-tuned fit that you can actually get with laces and traditional eyelets. So for me, it meant that I couldn't get a good enough lockdown around this ankle cuff here, which then translated into a little bit of play in the heel. My heel was swimming a little bit. And again, I'm going to get into that when I talk about the feel of this shoe. So lastly, on the depth of this shoe. So the Timp was a little bit shallow in general. I actually suggested taking out the Timp insole and basically putting something in there which was a little thinner, just to give you a little bit more room. And that actually, for me, ended up with a fairly decent performance like fit. This Timp 5 BOA actually has a bit more depth, and that's purely because of this tongue here. It's very, very stretchy. I'm not sure if to call it a tongue because it's not a tongue anymore, but it allows for a little bit more room for your foot to fill out the depth of the shoe. Yes, it still doesn't really have that width, and especially because the sidewalls here actually do raise up a little bit, it does confine the width of your foot a little. It just meant that you could expand into the top of the shoe a little more. So if you did find the Timp 5 to be a bit constricting over the top, maybe this would work a bit better. So this has been similar throughout a lot of the Altra line recently. After about 20 or 30k, it kind of packed down a little bit and I got a lot more wiggle room around my toes. And at that point, it was actually kind of nice. So I think that's it for the fit. So let's talk about the feel of this shoe. And I'm going to talk about the good aspects first. So It's the same outsole that we saw on the Timp 5, and actually this is pretty decent in general. The lugs are kind of small and thin, so durability-wise, maybe questionable, but they do a really good job at gripping on dry and even wet surfaces as well. So it's a little bit exposed. You do have EVA exposed here, but that's just to keep the weight down a little bit. So on the wet rocks and a little bit of mud, it actually did a really decent job. The platform is a 30mm stack height, which for me is a little bit high, but for people coming from traditional or conventional shoes like Hoka, then you'll probably feel at home in something like this. And if you are trying Altras for the first time on the trail, then a platform like this is maybe a good one just to try out, just to ease yourself into something foot shaped first of all, but maybe you transition down to something more minimal like a Superior and then into barefoot shoes, hopefully. It's a bit stiffer in general. There's a tiny bit of flexibility in the forefoot, but not too much. And then the torsional flexibility, well, it's quite stiff. And that contributes to a rolling rocker kind of motion. You can see there's some toe taper coming up here, so it tapers up towards the toes, and there's even some toe spring in there, so your toes are actually offset slightly up from that forefoot. So it does push you onto the next stride quite nicely. I'm not going to say that that's a great thing for foot health in general, but if you do want a little extra speed, especially on those rolling flatter surfaces, well, you do get that. So if you're optimizing for speed, great. If you're optimizing for foot health, maybe look elsewhere and think about how actually function barefoot. Okay, on to the bad aspects then. It's actually back down to this fit aspect and the BOA system, sadly. So because I wasn't able to get a good lockdown, and I think many people won't get a great lockdown in this purely because of this BOA system being, well, you can't fine tune it. You just got the one dial which locks you down. But if you have any play in any area, well, you can't do anything about it. So for me, that meant that the ankle cuff was just a bit loose. And on technical terrain, it meant that my heel was slipping around. On the technical descents, then I was slipping forward in the shoe. And it was a shame because the outsole was doing a really good job at actually sticking to the ground pretty well, but my foot was slipping inside. No matter how much I locked this down, well, it either got uncomfortable in certain areas or it was too loose in other areas. There's nothing you can do to fine tune that. So I've got to say it's got to come down to your foot in general. If your foot is perfected to the shape of this shoe, then great. But if for most people that's likely not going to be the case because that's just not how our feet are. So it means these are going to fit less people than what the Timp 5 would. And so because of that, I think it's actually tailored for more mellow trails where you're not going to have as much play in the base of the shoe, so you're not going to be off camber as much. And in that case, it can work quite well because you're not going to slip around in the shoe too much, and it allows you to go a bit faster because of that rocker motion and the toe spring, etc. But if you do hit that technical terrain, which you may, and it's a shame because the outsole would do really well, it's just not locked down enough. And to be honest, I've felt this in other shoes as well from Altra. So for example, some of the Mont Blancs, they've been a bit sloppy in the past as well. So really, I've got to say, you've got to go back to the traditional Altra shoes, the Superior, the Lone Peak if you have a deeper foot, and you're just going to get a better fit in general. Well, most of us will get a better fit in general. Some of you will do well in this, but likely you'll do just as well, if not better, in the Timp 5. So as for the durability, again, we're going to see similarities with the Timp 5. So the outsole, I did mention already, the lugs are kind of small and thin. So if you do take this on harder packed surfaces or even pavements, it's going to wear down quite quickly. So I wouldn't suggest that. If you're on softer surfaces, it's probably going to be good. There's a lot of exposed EVA there. You could slice into that with rocks, but in the end, that's likely not going to be the thing that fails first. The midsole, it's a Ego Max midsole. We've seen them before. They do pack out, and because it is a 30mm stack height, when it does pack out, it likely will feel a bit or generally flat. It's just going to happen. We know that happens, so don't expect it to feel plush for forever. You could still run it as long as you don't have any odd gait patterns or you're not tipping over the side of the shoe at all. You could still run it though. Where this differs the most from the Timp 5 is the upper, obviously. So on the medial side here, we can see quite a lot of overlays, and this is quite nice and protected. It's just weird though, because on the lateral side, you don't see the same pattern. So obviously, we do have this BOA dial here, which you can't get away from. If you smash that against a rock, that may break. I have heard that BOA lacing system warranty replacement schemes are pretty good. They will replace them if you do actually damage them, which is quite nice to know. But it just feels like an exposed area that is just waiting to be damaged. And then add on top of that all of this upper material area, which is completely exposed. It doesn't have any overlays. There's a possibility of gashing that against rocks and branches. And the laces, they do tuck through this webbing here. There is a bit of fraying on the webbing I've seen actually on straight out of the box. I don't think that's an issue because there's a lot of stitching in there. It's not going to come apart. But again, I worry a little if I keep scraping the side of this shoe, which you likely will if you're on alpine terrain or any type of technical terrain. You may have a durability issue there, and I do worry about that a bit. If you think back to the Timp 5, the Timp 5 has quite a lot of overlays around that area and, well, all around the shoe, and it's quite nice and protected. So, again, I think that's a downgrade. So, I don't know. Otherwise, the rest of the shoe is pretty similar to the rest of the Timp 5. So you'll get a decent package in terms of durability. It's just those exposed areas that I've just talked about. So this comes in at $175. And for a shoe with a BOA system, that's actually a decent price. I think it's the cheapest one I've seen on the trail, at least, of any brand. But I'm not sure if it's actually worth that extra $20 over the original Timp 5. I think the original Timp 5 actually offers quite a lot in its package in terms of the good durability. The lockdown is very good and it lends itself quite nicely to the race situations. It's 10 grams lighter. It doesn't really make too much difference, but this comes in at 290 grams. So 10.2 ounces, I think that is, which isn't lightweight, but it's also not like a heavy weight like the Olympus. We see the same geometry in the Timp 5. We see the same outsole in the Timp 5. It's really hard to say that you need to spend that extra $20 just for the ability to loosen and tighten the BOA system on the trail. So for me, this doesn't work on the trail that great. I think you should likely go for the Timp 5. The only people that should probably go for this Timp 5 BOA is somebody that really wants that ability to adjust the lacing on a run and adjust it quickly. Also, maybe if you're looking for a slightly relaxed fit in terms of a lot more or more depth in there, and then just a bit more flexibility in the upper, maybe this would work because the Timp 5 was a bit snug in areas. But even at that point, I would likely tell you to go for a different shoe instead. I'm finding it really hard to know what situations to suggest this shoe for. So that's about it. It's not a raving review for me. Maybe you disagree. If you do disagree, let me know in the comments, or just go and buy it yourself and maybe you'll like it. But it's just not the package that I think it could be.